Thank you for staying on with Niagawani, and here's some international updates. The S&P 500 closed barely higher yesterday, giving up most of its earlier gains as investors were cautious ahead of this week's testimony from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and the closely watched US jobs report. Earlier in the session, the indexes looked much stronger, with the Nasdaq gaining more than 1% before closing lower. The biggest boost had come from iPhone maker Apple Incorporation after Goldman Sachs initiated coverage with the buy rating. The Dow Jones Industrial Average rose 40.47 points or 0.12%, and the S&P 500 gained 2.78 points or 0.07%, and the Nasdaq Composite dropped 13.27 points or 0.11%. Among the S&P's 11 major industry sectors, 6 ended the day higher. The commodity-linked materials sector was the biggest decliner, falling 1.7% after China set a lower than expected target for economic growth this year at around 5%. On a separate news, Microsoft Corporation yesterday bundled the technology behind ChatGPT with its Power Platform that allows users to develop applications with little or no coding, the latest integration of artificial intelligence into its products. Big tech companies from Alphabet to Baidu Incorporation are speeding up the integration of generative AI technology that has gained popularity for its ability to generate human-like text responses to queries into their offerings. Microsoft said a line of business intelligence and app development tools within Power Platform, including Power Virtual Agent and AI Builder, was updated with the new capabilities. Microsoft has also added generative AI capabilities to AI Builder, which lets businesses automate workflows, and launched a new version of its business management platform, Dynamics 365, based on the technology. Dynamics 365 Copilot, the latest version of Microsoft's tool that includes a number of applications for sales, customer service and marketing, integrates AI to automate certain tasks like data gathering and analysis or creating an email campaign, among other capabilities. The company so far has announced AI updates for its popular Windows operating system and search engine Bing, but not yet for its Office productivity suite, which includes Word and Excel. Separately, Germany's government is planning on forbidding telecoms operators from using certain components from Chinese companies Huawei and ZTE in their 5G networks. The ban could include components already built into the networks, requiring operators to remove and replace them. A Huawei spokesperson said it did not comment on speculation about a possible ban on the use of certain components, and noted the company had a very good security record during its 20 years of delivering its technology to Germany and the rest of the world. A new report shows that Germany has actually become even more dependent on Huawei for its 5G radio access network equipment than its 4G network, even though operators have avoided using the firm's technology for the core networks. ZEIT Online said the government's cybersecurity agency and Interior Ministry had for months been checking if there were components in the growing 5G networks that could put German security at risk. The survey had not officially been ended, but the result was already clear. Oil prices edged slightly higher yesterday, bouncing back from early losses as top oil executives at an energy conference in Houston discussed supply tightness and hopes for rising Chinese demand. Oil market and logistics are tight and vulnerable to any unexpected supply disruption, as Russian oil is still getting to the market, but at different costs, said oil major Chevron Corp chief executive Mike Wirth. Crude prices may rise in the second half of the year as Chinese demand returns to the market, adding that the oil market has stabilized. Brent crude futures were trading up 35 cents or 0.4% at $86.18 a barrel, while US West Texas Intermediate crude futures were up 78 98 cents or 1% at $80.46. Oil was also supported by top crude exporter Saudi Arabia, raising prices for the flagship Arab Light crude it sells to Asia for a second month in April, as well as a weaker dollar. A weaker greenback makes dollar-denominated crude cheaper for foreign buyers and boosts demand. Next up, I had the chance to meet with the Vice President Regulatory Law at Bloom Energy, Arthur Haubenstock, last week to talk about transitioning towards a cleaner and sustainable energy. Let's take a look at the recording. All right, we're looking at the National Energy Policy, or NEP, of 2022 until 2040. And this is because the NEP that was launched is looking at the energy transition, or how to find the best power to our nation, in fact, region. And moving forward, perhaps trying to find the best mix that is not just sustainable and also economically viable as well. So that's a lot to unpack this morning. And we have to speak to some of the authority of the issue. And joining us in the studio this morning is Arthur Haubenstock, the Vice President Regulatory Law at Bloom Energy. Arthur, thank you for taking the time to speak with us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's really my pleasure.
All right, we've seen that the world is progressing towards cleaner energy, and likewise, Malaysia itself has set goals to increase the use of renewable energy and reduce the use of coal. So can you share what are some of the key approaches that is important towards the successful energy transition?
Absolutely. Well, it's been really delightful to be here in Malaysia, and I'm very impressed with the thoughtfulness that Malaysia has given, not just to setting goals, but to considering how to achieve them. And so we've been meeting with energy companies and governmental entities and even with youth leadership. Everyone is working together to try to identify the solutions that make the most sense for Malaysia. And what's really important when it comes to clean energy is to look at the resources you have at hand and to make continued progress while you still keep the lights on and you still keep rates affordable. It's not an easy balance, but it's a wonderful challenge, and there's wonderful tools to use to get there.
Okay, talk to us about the challenges. As we know, especially our countries in Asia, we have different backgrounds, we have different applications for energy and also for the environment. So what are some of the key challenges for our countries in Asia that we have to overcome and towards the energy transition?
What's often the biggest challenge, and it's not just in Asia, we see it in the United States and elsewhere around the world too, in Europe and in other places, is learning how to cooperate better. And what often happens with renewable energy, whether it's solar or wind or tidal or geothermal, no one has all of the answers all to themselves. You will have an excess at some times and a greater need at other times. And so you reduce the cost of clean energy and you increase your reliability if you are able to share. And also if you don't put all of your eggs in one basket. One of the things that we are learning is that very large scale power production, whether it's coal or solar or wind, can really be augmented by distributed energy, by having individual companies and even residences doing what they can to help make the energy system more reliable and cleaner. My company, Bloom Energy, produces, with the same basic technology, it produces fuel cells as well as hydrogen electrolyzers. It's originally was designed for the first manned mission to Mars. The idea was that you would take solar energy and use that to break water into hydrogen for fuel and oxygen for the astronauts to breathe. And then that hydrogen can either be used directly as a fuel or it could be put back into the same piece of equipment and turned back into electricity. Now here we are 20-something years later, and hydrogen is becoming a very, very exciting way for us. Exciting is a terrible word to use for energy policy, but although those of us who do energy policy find it really exciting. A great way to fill in the gaps between when the sun is shining and the wind is blowing, or when we have hydroelectric dams. Hydrogen can really start to fill in those gaps, and it can be used on a distributed basis or on a utility scale basis as well.
Talking about renewable energy, but focusing on Malaysia, in your opinion, what's our condition, what's our situation like towards the cleaner energy?
So Malaysia is very heavily dependent on coal, and there have been some very strong commitments to start to move towards a cleaner energy system. There are things that can be done in the near term to reduce the emissions from coal, and I think there's a lot of time and resources being spent on that, but there's also time and resources being spent on doing things like putting rooftop solar onto government buildings or schools, making them more resilient and less dependent on the larger grid. There is no one silver bullet. There is what we like to refer to as silver buckshot. There's all these little different answers that come together to create a better solution. And I do think that there's a real sincere effort, and it's really such a pleasure to be able to share the lessons that we've learned, both good and bad, in the United States with Malaysia, so it can pick and choose what it really works locally here for Malaysia and what works for the broader region. At the end of the day, we were talking last night, Malaysia is a nation that has always depended on trade with other countries, and other countries are really paying a lot of attention to climate and to the kinds of emissions that are associated with the products and services that they buy. So if you are one of Malaysia's trading partners and you are buying something from Malaysia, you want to know that the energy used to produce that product was something that protects the climate. And I think that that's going to be a big economic driver for Malaysia. Fortunately, it has the resources to be able to do that, and it will continue to make steady progress towards a more climate protective energy system.
Arthur, you mentioned about hydrogen just now, and
yes,
and that's interesting. But maybe you can share what are some of the other sources that we can use other than hydrogens towards the renewable energy transition?
Well, Malaysia has some geothermal resources, which are so important to look into. It has the capability of doing quite a lot with residential or rooftop solar, as well as with utility scale solar. I know it doesn't have the strongest wind capabilities, but it has partners not that far away that can collectively work. So if you start to build a more regional transmission system, you can do some of that sharing of resources that we talked about earlier. The other thing to think about, and it can be challenging when energy prices are low, but customers actually have tremendous opportunities to make the energy system more reliable and cleaner at the same time. In California, we nearly had blackouts last summer. It came very, very close, and the only thing that really kept the blackouts from happening was having industrial and commercial and even residential users reduce their energy need at the time that it was most difficult to produce renewable energy. So they cut back. Many of them were paid for it through virtual power plants. The idea is to try to aggregate all these changes and pay somebody for not using energy that they might otherwise use. Some of it was just voluntary, people who were good Samaritans and they didn't want the lights to go out. So there's a lot of power on the user side. We used to think of energy as something that is just delivered to us and not think about our interaction with the energy system. But there's tremendous opportunity to do that, and especially when you start doing more distributed energy, whether it's distributed solar or distributed batteries or fuel cells, which is what our company does, that empowers customers to be part of the solution.
All right, that is all for today's Niagauni. Be sure to tune in to us every weekday, Monday to Friday, 9 a.m. only on Asrawani. I'm Nabila Khalida. Thanks for watching.